We're back now. A source within the Trump administration telling CNN that the president could launch an investigation into his claims of voter fraud as early as tomorrow. Van Jones is back with me, Jeffrey Lord as well, and Reverend Dr. William Barber. We're also joined by Michael Eric Dyson. He's a professor of sociology at Georgetown University. He's the author of Tears We Cannot Stop, a sermon to white America. My initial intention was to talk to you about Chicago and about violence, but I want to bring you in because you know about this subject, and we'll get to that a little bit later on. So, Professor, thank you so much. Van, the president also said that all the votes go to the other side, but CNN is reporting that Steve Bannon and Treasury nominee Steve Mnuchin are both registered in 2 states. That doesn't mean that they committed voter fraud, that they voted for Hillary Clinton, does it?
No, it doesn't. I think that, some good can come out of this, I hope. If you want to have an honest conversation about voting in America and you look at it seriously, what you will find will be shocking. We don't have a great voting system, and the poorer you are, the more rural you are, the tougher your neighborhood is and from an urban point of view, the less you are able to exercise your vote. Mm-hmm. So it's going to turn out that when you look into this, the people who are going to benefit, if you really want to look at voting, are going to be low-income people and people of color. That's who's having a hard time voting. Unfortunately, the conversation is starting off in a ridiculous place.
It's being framed in a manner
It's being framed right now that I think is unfortunate. It used to be that presidents said, I'm going to go into states where actual human beings are being stopped from voting. Now we have a president who says, I'm going to go into states where phantoms who don't exist are voting when they shouldn't be. And I think we can still rescue it, but it's bad.
Yeah, so listen, you heard the president refer to this Pew report. Jeffrey and Dr. Barber and Michael, you heard this in that interview with David Muir. One of the authors of that Pew study has been talking to CNN all day. Listen to his response.
This is not something that hasn't been looked at. The Bush administration DOJ looked at this. The Federal Election Assistance Commission looked at this. Secretaries of State, both Republicans and Democrats, look at this regularly throughout the election cycle. The Secretary of State of Ohio, Republican John Huston, does it every 2 years. The Republican Secretary of State of Louisiana, Tom Shedler, does a great job of looking at this as well. And they've all come to the same conclusion, which is that the administrative inefficiencies that might exist on the voter rolls do not result in fraudulent ballots being cast. And in fact, in the 5 years since that report was issued, the voter lists have gotten much, much better thanks to the fine work of election officials all across the country to use data and technology to make sure that they can keep up with people's mobility.
And Dr. Dyson, CNN has confirmed statements from, there's no voter fraud from the Secretaries of State from Massachusetts, Colorado, Arizona, Vermont, Louisiana, Virginia, Ohio, and California. What's going on here? What's your reaction?
Well, I think it's symptomatic of this president's inability to square reality with fantasy. The word empirical means that which can be falsified or verified through the census. So if you've got a claim about a particular truth, then produce the proof that substantiates the claim. But he has none. So he projects out of fantasy what he believes to be the case, what he wants to be the case, and he asserts it, and willy-nilly he expects everybody to fall in line. The reality is, as much as Putin was a problem in terms of hacking, here's something that we need to confront, that the real hacking problem, the real problem with voting in this last election happens to be, as Van said earlier, with people of color, elderly people in certain regions of this country who were denied access to voting polls and because of voter ID laws and a whole host of energy and efforts that were directed toward poor people and people of color. So the reality is, at the end of the day, this reinforces the damage that is done to those communities. I hope, like Van, that some spotlight will be put on them. But what I fear is that in all of this miasma and all of this madness, that what we end up seeing is that Donald Trump is living in a fantasy world. The president of the United States of America, exercising power as the most powerful man in the world, is going by delusion as opposed to fact. And that is undermining and circumventing the very flourishing of the democracy he leads. This is a real serious issue.
Let me focus on an area of agreement here. I have a 97-year-old mom who's been voting all her life. When Pennsylvania passed the ID law, she, of course, no longer drives. So I had to take her over to the motor vehicles department to get, it looks like a license, but she can't drive, so it's an ID supplied by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I don't see any reason why governments, state governments, don't send someone to your house. if you can't do it, if there's some economic reason or an age-related reason, right, go to your house and take the picture. How hard is that? I mean, I do think that we have to take care of this.
Dr. Barber?
Yeah, but the problem is we've had elections all the way through 2008. This started when Obama was elected and African American Latinos voted in mass. And all of a sudden there's a problem with fraud. When these states began to pass, like North Carolina, it's not about photo ID. In North Carolina, they rolled back same-day registration, they rolled back early voting, they lied about fraud to pass a photo ID, a strict form of photo ID. They lied that people didn't have some form of ID when they first registered to vote. So, Don, it's a long discussion, but what we really ought to be talking about is restoring the Voting Rights Act, dealing with voter suppression that has been proven in the courts. That's what we should be dealing with, and opening up access to this democracy.
And as the outgoing president, President Barack Obama, said, we should be trying to get as many people, make it easier for people to vote as possible to get people into the voting process. Our conversation continues on the other side of this break. And we're back now having a very lively conversation and informative, I think you would agree. Van Jones is here, Jeffrey Lord, Reverend Dr. William Barber, and Michael Eric Dyson. The author of the book, Tears We Cannot Stop. Michael, let's talk about this because it relates to what the president did today. You're in Chicago tonight. Rahm Emanuel, he says Chicago is going to remain a sanctuary city in spite of the president's threat to cut off federal funding. Will other cities follow?
One hopes so. I mean, the reality is it's an interesting diversion and contradiction in conservatives who usually accede to the legitimacy of states' rights. And at the same time, the imposition of federal rule and law at the behest of the presidency suggests some interesting contradictions. But I think that states around this country and cities around this country have to recognize that with a presidency that has echoed surprisingly narrow definitions of what it means to be an American and has exploded a conception of diversity that brings people in, that wants to build bridges and not walls, I think that brave politicians have to stand up to President Trump and remind him that this is a citizenry that is predicated upon democracy and to opening those borders to receive all of those who would come in to this country to strengthen it, since coerced immigration and immigrants who came here voluntarily make up the bulk of this nation and make up its greatness.
He is saying that he's going to send in the feds and putting out a statement on that. Do you give him credit for wanting to do something about it? He said, I will send in the feds. And he talks about the number of shootings. Do you give him any credit at all?
Well, look, I give him credit for wanting to do something about it, but here's the problem. When the presence of the feds comes, what happens? First of all, it criminalizes an entire population of people so that they become casualties of that war. Number two, if they don't make distinctions between people who are actually likely to commit a particular crime and those who haven't, it only exacerbates the problem. And then thirdly, after those troops leave, what has it done to address some of the underlying problems, which is some of the things I talk about in my book? The economic inequality, the lack of access to capital, the war zones that these enclaves of civic terror called ghettos and slums have become. What about the closing of schools? What about the denial of opportunity educationally? What about job creation? Those are some of the things. If Donald Trump were a smart president, what he would say is that he would bring his entrepreneurial might to bear upon some of these problems to remove the blight as opposed to imposing federal reign.
Van Jones?
Look, again, there is an opportunity here. I think that the Democrats have done a miserable job of dealing with poverty for their constituents in urban areas. Republicans have done a miserable job of dealing with rural poverty. Both parties have let down the poor. Even if a conversation starts in a bad place, and I think talking about sitting in the feds is the worst place to start the conversation has now been started. I think it can open doors for people who have solutions. I would love to see a Jack Kemp kind of approach in urban America. I don't want to see a militarization approach, but I just want to say the fact that the president's talking about this could be a good thing.
A good thing, exactly. Somebody who worked for Jack Kemp. When I worked for him, he made a point of having those of us who worked for him go into the cities and talk to people and have a better understanding of the problem. The very first thing to do is stop the carnage. And then, as Dr. Dyson's saying, there are other things that can be done.
And I'll give you the last word, Dr. Barber. I only have just a few seconds left, if you will.
Well, we need a real moral revolution of values. We have to deal with the divestment of in these communities. We had 10,000 clergy that offered to meet with Donald Trump in a house of worship to deal with these issues. We know he got the letter, it was certified. They never responded. These are serious moral issues, whether it's voting, whether it's immigration, whether it's dealing with poverty, and it's not any one party, but it's a fact dealing with these issues, doing a serious audit of this country and fixing the problem. We need to do that, but we can't have somebody who's deluded and who's dealing more in lies than they are in the truth.
Dr. Barber, thank you. Van Jones, thank you. Jeffrey Lord, and also thank you to Michael Eric Dyson. The book is called Tears We Cannot Stop, and it's on in bookstores now, or you can get it online. Thank you very much, and we'll have you back to talk more about the book, Dr. Dyson. We appreciate it. We'll be right back.